Hey everyone, welcome back to Sip and Talk.
Good to be back.
So we got this message from a listener in Taiwan recently, pointing us to some pretty classic Chinese state propaganda that's making the rounds online.
Oh, yeah. What was it this time?
It's this whole thing about the 5 big benefits for Taiwan if unification happens. You know, the list.
The famous 5. Let me guess. Better transportation, saving money on military stuff, a booming economy, sharing in China's glory, and peace.
You got it. Exactly those 5. Sounds like a fantastic love upgrade package, doesn't it?
Right. Join us, enjoy cheaper freedom.
Yeah, pretty much. But, you know, today we're not just here to make fun of it, though it's tempting. We really want to dig into the logic, or maybe the lack of logic, behind this whole unification benefits idea.
Because if you actually, look at the data, compare the history, these so-called benefits start to look a bit shaky.
Well, more than a bit shaky, I'd say. They kind of crumble under scrutiny.
Yeah, and we're also going to talk about why so much of the online discussion, especially those short videos from China, feels so emotional, so charged, instead of like a rational debate.
Definitely. And we've actually structured this whole Sip and Talk around 4 main themes to really get under the hood of this.
Okay, lay them out for us.
First up, we're going to compare how South Korea and Taiwan got to democracy. 2 very different paths.
Super different. One was explosive, the other much quieter. That's key context.
Second, we'll look at the Korean War versus the Chinese Civil War. Similar timing, totally different beasts in terms of what they were and how they ended. Or didn't end, in one case.
Right. One was internal, one was a global proxy fight. Big difference for today's politics.
Third, we need to talk about China's system itself. The shift from, let's say, collective authoritarianism more towards, well, totalitarian tendencies under Xi Jinping. What do those terms even mean?
Yeah, defining authoritarianism versus totalitarianism is crucial. And why does Xi seem to fit more into that more extreme category?
Exactly. And then finally, the main event. Debunking those 5 big benefits. We'll hit each one. Plus, we'll touch on how China's short video scene criticizes, well, everyone, the West, Japan, South Korea, and especially Taiwan's ruling party. Yeah. Like that whole fuss over the cash handout.
The 10,000 TWD payout. Yeah, that was spun in some wild ways.
Totally. So we've done our homework here. We've checked sources like the World Bank, the IMF, Freedom House, the big international players.
Standard practice for us. But hey, we always say this, don't just take our word for it. We really encourage you, the listener, to look this stuff up yourself. Be skeptical.
Definitely. Check the data, form your own view.
And we'll try to break down some of the sillier points with, everyday examples, like that line about stop buying U.S. weapons and save money for welfare.
Oh, man, that one kills me every time.
Right. It's just, wow.
Imagine this. Okay. Your neighbor stands outside your house every single day, just waving a huge axe, menacingly.
Okay, got the picture. Not friendly.
Then he leans over and says, hey, just open your door. Get rid of your locks and security system. Let me come in, and then you'll have peace. Plus, think of all the money you'll save.
Yeah, that's not peace. That's a threat. That's let me in, or else.
Precisely. It's coercion dressed up as a benefit.
So today, that's the mission. We're going to analyze rationally, stay critical, and keep asking that key question.
When someone tells you unification has benefits, you got to ask.
Benefits for whom?
All right, let's jump into our first theme then. Okay, so let's rewind a bit. Think about East Asia back in the, say, 70s and 80s. You've got Taiwan and South Korea, both islands or island adjacent, both front lines in the Cold War. Both key U.S. allies.
And both ruled by pretty hardcore authoritarian regimes for a long, long time.
Exactly. But how they got out of that, how they transitioned to democracy was just fundamentally different. The style, the process, and really the human cost.
Yeah, South Korea's transition, people often call it explosive. It was really driven by people power, from the streets up.
Yeah. Massive protests.
Yeah.
Right? Often really confrontational, sometimes violent. This wasn't the guys in charge deciding, okay, time for democracy. It was them being forced.
Absolutely forced. And the cost was high. You have these incredibly traumatic events like the Gwangju uprising in 1980. The military regime just brutally crushed pro-democracy protests, mainly students.
That kind of state violence leaves scars, doesn't it? Deep ones.
For sure. And those scars arguably fueled the later movements that did succeed. The big one was in 1987, the June Democratic Uprising.
Millions of people, right, all across the country.
Millions, just out in the streets, demanding change, pushing back against the military government, which was led by Chen Duan at the time.
And the regime basically blinked.
They looked at the sheer scale of it, the national paralysis, the international pressure, and they must have realized, okay, Holding on to power like this is going to cost way too much. So they yielded. They agreed to direct presidential elections.
Yielded. That's the key word. Because the regime in South Korea was domestic, right?
Yeah.
It came from within their own military, their own elite structures.
Exactly. It was Koreans versus Koreans, essentially. So the only way democracy could win was through this massive, raw, popular pressure. And sadly, yeah, often bloodshed.
Now flip that coin. Look at Taiwan. Scholars call its transition an elite-led process, or sometimes the quiet revolution.
Much more gradual, lots of negotiation behind the scenes, policy changes, less about massive street battles.
But wait, why? The KMT, the ruling party in Taiwan, they were authoritarian too. Why didn't they just dig in their heels like the Korean generals tried to?
That's the million-dollar question, and the answer is crucial. The KMT was fundamentally different. They were, in political science terms, an external regime.
Meaning they came from outside.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They lost the Chinese Civil War on the mainland and retreated to Taiwan in 1949. They were mainlanders ruling an island mostly populated by native Taiwanese. They were outsiders.
So staying in power meant they had to adapt. They couldn't just rely on force forever.
Precisely. For long-term survival, for legitimacy, they figured out pretty early on they had to bring local Taiwanese elites into the system. Business leaders, intellectuals, local politicians.
So the moves by Chiang Ching-kuo to open things up internally, then lifting martial law in 1987, and later the constitutional stuff under Lee Teng-hui, that wasn't just being nice.
Not entirely, no. It was smart politics. It was calculated survival. An external regime realizing it needed to localize, to integrate, to survive long term.
And that created the space for things to change more gradually.
Yeah, it allowed for political liberalization bit by bit.
Right.
Power could be negotiated, transferred in a more managed way, which is how you eventually get to the first direct presidential election in 1996 without the same level of upheaval as Korea.
Makes sense. That's why the social cost was lower in Taiwan. Even big protests like the Wild Lily student movement in 1990 ended with dialogue, not tanks.
Right. Peaceful negotiation became the model, unlike the crackdowns in Korea.
So, two very different stories. South Korea. Democracy won through sheer force of will from the people, overcoming a dug-in domestic regime at great cost.
Right.
Taiwan. Democracy emerges more through elite negotiation, driven by this unique historical situation of an external regime needing to adapt.
And the takeaway for our discussion today is that Taiwan built its democracy internally, strategically, avoiding that mass trauma. It wasn't something granted or easily surrendered.
Okay, moving on. Let's talk about the wars that really shaped this region. The Chinese Civil War, roughly 1945 to 49, and the Korean War, 50 to 53.
Right, happening almost back to back, both involving communism versus anti-communism, but structurally fundamentally different conflicts.
And understanding that difference is key to understanding Beijing's narrative today about Taiwan.
Absolutely. The Chinese Civil War was pretty much an internal fight. It was the KMT versus the CCP, fighting for control of China.
Were other countries involved?
Well, yeah, the U.S. gave some aid to the KMT, the Soviets helped the CCP, but there wasn't massive direct foreign military intervention like you saw later in Korea. It was primarily Chinese factions fighting each other.
And the outcome was?
Decisive, a clear winner. The CCP won, established the People's Republic of China, and the KMT had to retreat to Taiwan. Game over on the mainland.
A brutal conclusion. The estimated casualties are staggering.
Yeah, tragically high. Estimates vary, but often cited figures are somewhere in the range of 6 to 8 million people, including many civilians. A massive internal tragedy.
Okay, now pivot to Korea, just a year later.
Totally different ballgame. The Korean War wasn't just an internal squabble. It was a full-blown, hot, Cold War proxy conflict from the get-go.
Started by North Korea invading the South, but then the world jumps in.
Immediately. You had the U.S. leading a United Nations coalition on one side, and then, crucially, China jumps in directly with its volunteer army fighting alongside North Korea.
So massive international involvement. This wasn't just about Korea anymore.
Not at all. It became this major East versus West showdown, dictated by global geopolitics way beyond the peninsula itself.
And the outcome this time?
Not a conclusion. Not a victory for either side. It was basically a stalemate, a suspension. It ended with an armistice in 1953, just a ceasefire, not a peace treaty.
And that division at the 38th parallel is still there today, frozen.
Frozen in time. A temporary line that became permanent, recognized internationally, even if it's still tense. Casualties were horrific too, maybe 3 to 4 million. But the key structural difference is It ended in suspension, not conclusion.
Okay, so why does this distinction, conclusion versus suspension, matter so much now?
Because of the narrative Beijing uses. Since the Chinese Civil War did have a conclusion, with the KMT retreating, Beijing frames the Taiwan issue as simply unfinished business from that internal conflict.
So they argue it's purely an internal affair, nobody else's business.
Exactly. It minimizes the right of the international community to get involved.
Right.
But they can't really use that same logic for Korea.
Why not?
Because the Korean War was international. It ended with an international agreement, the armistice. And the deep involvement of global powers creates a stronger, accepted basis for continued international interest and stability there.
So Beijing can't just say butt out regarding Korea the way they try to with Taiwan.
Right. The internal affairs argument doesn't hold the same water for Korea because of how that war started and ended.
And this links back to unification. If Beijing were to take Taiwan, they'd frame it as just finishing that old civil war, making any outside help for Taiwan look like interference in China's internal matters.
That's the diplomatic game. The historical narrative becomes a political weapon.
Okay, before we tackle those 5 benefits head on, we really need to understand the nature of the government offering them. Just saying Beijing is authoritarian doesn't quite capture the picture anymore, does it?
No, it's become more complex. We need to be clearer about the terms, specifically authoritarianism versus totalitarianism, and see where China sits on that spectrum, especially now.
All right, break it down for us. Political Science 101, authoritarianism.
Okay, think of authoritarianism, 机关制 in Mandarin, as a system where power is concentrated, maybe in a party elite, a military junta, a single leader, but the main focus is controlling political power and maintaining stability.
So they control the government, the elections, if any, the media, but maybe not every single aspect of your life.
Generally, yeah. Authoritarian regimes often allow some limited private space, social life, maybe economic activity, as long as you follow the golden rule, don't oppose the regime, stay quiet politically, focus on your business or family, and they might leave you relatively alone.
That sounds kind of like China in the, say, late 90s, early under Jiang Zemin or Hu Jintao.
Exactly. That era is often seen as a period of institutionalized authoritarianism. Political control was tight, but there was space for economic liberalization and some personal freedom as long as you didn't cross the political lines.
Okay, so what's totalitarianism then? Jiquanzi again. Wait, same term.
Yeah, that's a tricky point in translation. Jiquanzi is often used for both, but context matters. Some scholars use Quanengzi for totalitarianism to be clearer, but concept-wise, totalitarianism is the extreme end. Power isn't just concentrated, it's absolute and seeks to control everything.
Everything, like
your thoughts, your culture, the economy, education, your family life, your history. There's no private sphere safe from the state's reach.
And the demand isn't just, don't oppose me,
It's, you must believe me. You must actively participate in the ideology. Think Stalin's Soviet Union or Mao's China, especially during the Cultural Revolution. Total control, total mobilization.
Okay, got it. So where has China been on this spectrum?
It's been a journey. The Mao era was definitely the peak of totalitarian control. Cult of personality, mass campaigns, purging enemies, just chaos.
And then Deng Xiaoping came in after Mao died.
Right. And Deng, having lived through that chaos, deliberately shifted the system away from that personalistic totalitarian model towards a more predictable, institutionalized authoritarianism.
How? What were the mechanisms?
Key things were establishing collective leadership rule by committee, essentially, and implementing strict term limits for top leaders. The idea was precisely to prevent another Mao figure from emerging and causing that kind of devastation again.
So the Jiang and Hu eras were the result of that, trying to keep power collective and rule-based within the party structure.
Exactly. That was the model for a couple of decades. But now we're seeing a major shift back under Xi Jinping, a reconcentration of power.
Moving back towards the totalitarian end of the spectrum.
That's how many analysts see it. The single biggest, most undeniable sign was in 2018 when they amended the Constitution to remove the 2-term limit for the presidency.
Yeah, that was huge. Basically opened the door for Xi to rule for life.
It symbolically dismantled those post-Mao guardrails against personal dictatorship. So now, scholars often describe the system as personalized authoritarianism. It might not be full-blown Maoist totalitarianism in terms of, say, mass street chaos, but it has very strong totalitarian leanings.
What are those leanings? What does that look like in practice?
You see it in the intense focus on ideological conformity, the demand for absolute personal loyalty to Xi as the core leader, The pervasive digital surveillance, think Skynet, social credit systems controlling information, cracking down on any dissent, even in universities or private companies. It's a systematic effort to control thought and behavior.
It feels like the space for just being quiet and minding your own business is shrinking.
It definitely seems that way. The pressure to actively support the party line, to demonstrate loyalty, is much higher.
You know, there was that anecdote floating around social media about President Trump supposedly saying he wished his cabinet was as obedient or maybe afraid of him as Xi's officials seem to be.
Yeah, I saw that too. Whether the quote is perfectly accurate or not, it captures that perception from the outside, the perception of extreme personalized power where officials seem to display total deference, maybe even fear. That's a hallmark of moving away from institutional rules towards personal dominance.
So the system offering these benefits to Taiwan isn't the collective leadership China of 15 years ago. It's a system increasingly defined by one leader's power and ideological demands.
Exactly. And that context is absolutely critical when evaluating the promises being made.
All right, let's get to the main course. We've got the background. Taiwan's homegrown democracy, the different war legacies, China's shift towards this personalized, almost totalitarian system. Now, let's tackle those 5 benefits head on.
And let's just start with the big picture absurdity, right? The core economic reality. They're talking about a regime China with a GDP per capita around, what, $13,000 USD?
Roughly, yeah. IMF estimates put it around $13,314.
Okay, $13K. And they're promising to uplift and enrich Taiwan, which has a GDP per capita of
around 37,000 USD. So Taiwan's is about 2.8 times higher per person.
It's like the guy living in a shack offering to renovate your mansion. The basic premise is just upside down.
Okay, let's go through them one by one. Benefit number 1, transportation and infrastructure. Build all the things.
Yeah, the promise is China will come in, build amazing high-speed rail, maybe even tunnels straight through the Central Mountain Range, and do it all super cheap and efficiently.
Okay, red flags immediately. First off, quality. Taiwan's infrastructure is already top-notch, isn't it?
Yeah, the World Economic Forum consistently ranks Taiwan's infrastructure quality very high, like 15th globally. China's ranking much low, around 39th. Taiwan already has excellent roads, rail, ports, including incredible engineering like the Snow Mountain Tunnel, which is almost 13 kilometers long.
So step 1, Taiwan doesn't really need a massive infrastructure overhaul from China. Step 2, that Central Mountain Range idea.
That's just fantasy engineering, basically. We're talking about one of the most geologically complex, seismically active mountain ranges in the world, tunneling high-speed rail through that.
The cost would be astronomical, right? Trillions of new Taiwan dollars.
Easily. And the risk? Unbelievably high. Forget budget overruns. You're talking about massive safety risks. It makes projects on the mainland look simple by comparison.
Okay, so quality isn't better. Feasibility is questionable.
Yeah.
What about the money? China has lots of money for big projects, right?
Well, yes and no. They spend a lot on infrastructure, but how sustainable is it? The IMF estimates China's hidden local government debt. The off-the-book stuff is something like 66% of their entire GDP.
Whoa, 66%? That's massive.
It's huge. They're dealing with major domestic debt issues, often linked to exactly this kind of infrastructure spending, which sometimes leads to those infamous tofu dreg quality problems we hear about, projects built shoddily because of corruption or rushed schedules.
So they don't really have the spare cash or the proven quality track record to swoop in and fix Taiwan's already excellent infrastructure.
Not really. The promise is basically, let us replace your world-class system with potentially lower-quality, seismically risky projects financed by debt we can't really afford. It makes no sense.
Okay, benefit number 2. Save money on military spending. Get rid of those pricey American weapons.
Ah, yes. The axe-wielding neighbor's financial advice again. Put down your shield, save money.
How much does Taiwan even spend on defense, relatively?
It's around 2.45% of its GDP. Which sounds like a lot, but compare it to China. China's official military budget, according to Saparai for 2025, is around $296 billion USD.
Billion with a B. How does that compare to Taiwan's total?
It's roughly 15 times larger than Taiwan's entire defense budget.
Okay, so the argument is Taiwan gives up its 2.45%, and then what happens to that money? Does it really go to welfare?
That's the trap. Taiwan wouldn't just magically save that money. It would stop funding its own defense, designed to protect its democracy. Where would that fiscal space go? It would effectively be absorbed into paying for Beijing's massive military and, crucially, its internal security and surveillance state.
So money that currently buys, say, fighter jets to deter an invasion would instead go towards funding things like China's Skynet surveillance system.
or towards the costs of maintaining control over regions like Xinjiang or Tibet, or towards funding the political officers and security apparatus needed to manage a newly incorporated Taiwan. You're not saving money. You're redirecting it from self-defense to funding your own occupation and the oppressor's military machine.
You're trading spending on locks for your door for spending on the bars for your cage.
That's a pretty good way to put it.
All right, benefits 3 and 4 are kind of linked. Sharing in China's glory and getting huge economic investments. Join the Great Rejuvenation.
Again, back to the basic numbers. Why does an economy with $37,000 GDP per capita need investment and glory from one with $13,000? Taiwan's economy is already highly advanced, focused on cutting-edge tech, integrated into democratic supply chains.
While China's economy, despite its size, is facing some serious headwinds, right? Property crisis, local debt, youth unemployment.
Serious structural issues.
Yeah.
The idea that Taiwan needs China for economic prosperity is just backward. If anything, Taiwan's challenge is managing its economic relationship with China carefully, not diving in head first.
And for the glory part, we have a perfect case study. What happened there after the handover in 1997? They were promised economic benefits, stability, one country, two systems.
And look what happened. Hong Kong used to be #1 globally in economic freedom rankings. Now, it's plummeted. Capital has fled. Businesses are wary, precisely because the political promises weren't kept. Beijing eroded the legal autonomy and political freedoms.
So the political takeover directly damaged the economic benefit.
Absolutely. It showed that you can't separate them. When political liberty goes, the economic dynamism built on rule of law and trust often goes with it. The glory came at the cost of freedom, and that cost tanked the promised prosperity.
Okay, finally the big one. Benefit number 5, peace. Unification means no more war threat. Permanent peace.
This is the most emotionally powerful pitch, but it's also the most transparently coercive. The peace on offer is the peace of submission.
The peace of the conquered.
Exactly. The price for this peace is giving up your sovereignty, your democracy, your fundamental freedoms. Let's look at the Freedom House Democracy Index scores again.
Taiwan scores.
94 out of 100. A full, vibrant democracy.
And China.
9 out of 100. Classified as not free.
So the deal is, trade your 94-point democracy for a 9-point authoritarian system, and the reward is that the 9-point system stops threatening you.
That's the raw transaction. It's not peace, it's capitulation. It's
Right.
accepting subjugation as the price for not being attacked by the subjugator.
Okay, so we've picked apart the benefits,
Yeah.
and they don't seem to hold up to data or logic. But that still leaves the question, why does this stuff spread? Why do these emotional, often fact-free, short videos gain so much traction online?
Yeah, it's not accidental. It's not just random people making angry videos. It's often the product of a carefully managed ecosystem, almost like a bias factory that has several layers working together.
Bias factor. Okay, I like that. What are the layers?
First, you have to look at the soil it grows in. Layer 1 is the algorithm fertilizer.
Meaning the platforms themselves, like Douyin, TikTok's counterpart.
Exactly. These platforms are designed to maximize engagement. And what drives engagement? Strong emotions.
Yeah.
Anger, fear, outrage, hyperpatriotism. Studies have shown emotional content keeps people watching longer, maybe 28 seconds on average for something fiery, compared to maybe 9 seconds for something complex, rational, data-heavy. The algorithm learns this and pushes the emotional stuff because it means more eyeballs, more ad revenue. Emotion is traffic.
Okay, so the platform prefers emotion. Layer 2?
Censorship scissors. The state isn't passive here. It actively shapes the information landscape. Content that's rational, critical, maybe uses data to question the official narrative, that gets deleted. High deletion rates, sometimes reportedly up to 88% for certain types of analytical content.
Wow. But what about the emotional stuff? The stuff attacking, say, the US or Japan or Taiwan?
That stuff often gets a pass. Polarizing, nationalistic, angry content can have retention rates close to 98%. It serves the state's narrative, so the censors deliberately cut away the rationality and preserve the polarization.
Creating this echo chamber where only the emotional approved messages survive and spread.
Precisely. Layer 3 is the educational seeds. This starts way earlier. The Chinese education system places a huge emphasis on patriotism, national history, from the party's perspective, obedience.
How much emphasis?
Some analyses suggest patriotic or ideological education can make up nearly 18% of the curriculum. Meanwhile, subjects focused on logic, critical thinking, independent analysis, maybe less than 1%, like 0.8% in some cases.
So you're basically trained from a young age to accept the official line and not necessarily to question its logical foundation.
It certainly fosters compliance over critique, and then layer 4 ties it all together. Social pressure and involution.
Involution, that's that intense internal competition, right? The feeling of being stuck in a rat race.
Yeah, super high pressure, long work hours, those 996 schedules, or even worse, people are exhausted, mentally drained. Studies suggest that the average person might only have like 12 minutes of real free time per day to actually stop and verify information they see online.
12 minutes, that's nothing.
Exactly. So if you're exhausted scrolling on your phone during those few minutes, what are you more likely to engage with? A complex article requiring focus, or a 28-second video that gives you an instant emotional hit and confirms biases you already have?
The emotional hit, probably. It's easier.
It's effortless, and it makes people easy targets for this kind of content. You see these hashtags targeting Taiwan, like the Taiwan glass heart one, getting billions of views. It shows how dominant this emotional, often aggressive language is.
That's a really useful framework. Let's apply it to a specific example. You mentioned the Taiwan cash handout earlier. Randy, giving every citizen 10,000 TWD.
Right, about $300 or so.
How did the bias factory handle that? What was the narrative from Chinese state media and maybe some sympathetic voices?
The dominant frame was that the ruling party in Taiwan, the DPP, was just throwing money around recklessly to buy votes. Or, even more dramatically, that this was proof the government was broke, a sign of financial collapse.
Implying it was some desperate, maybe even corrupt decision made solely by the ruling party.
Exactly. It fits the narrative of a failing, incompetent democratic government. But what was the reality? It was way more complicated.
How so?
Well, first, the idea didn't even originate with the DPP. It was actually pushed hard by the opposition parties in Taiwan's legislature, the KMT and the TPT. They saw a budget surplus and demanded it be given back to the people.
A budget surplus, so the government wasn't broke.
Far from it. Taiwan had a massive tax surplus, over 528 billion TWD, which is like 17 billion US dollars, mainly because corporate profits and exports were unexpectedly high. So the money was there. It wasn't new debt.
So the opposition proposed it, using a surplus. What did the ruling party, the DPP, do?
Initially, the DPP administration actually resisted. They argued it might be better to use the surplus for other things, like paying down debt or funding infrastructure. But the public pressure, fueled by the opposition's demands, became overwhelming.
So they eventually agreed.
Yeah, they basically had to. It became a matter of democratic compromise. The legislature, reflecting popular demand, pushed the administration to act. It was a messy, noisy public debate, exactly how things often work in a democracy.
So the reality was, opposition proposes, government resists, public demands, compromise reached, funded by a surplus. The propaganda version was, ruling party desperately throws money, it doesn't have to buy votes.
Complete opposite. And the irony is just huge, isn't it?
How so?
You have this propaganda machine criticizing Taiwan for a transparent, democratically debated handout funded by a surplus, while completely ignoring their own government spending $296 billion on its military, with zero public debate, zero transparency, zero democratic accountability.
They're using standards to criticize Taiwan that they would never apply to themselves.
Classic move. They criticize the process of democratic compromise using language that only really fits their own top-down, opaque system.
Okay, one last piece before we wrap up. This is about language itself. The words used across the Taiwan Strait are often weapons, right? Like the term authorities.
Oh yeah, language is a key battleground. How each side refers to the other is loaded with political meaning.
So when Beijing media or officials talk about the government in Taiwan, they almost always say the Taiwan authorities or maybe the governing authorities on Taiwan. Why? What's the point?
It's a deliberate political downgrade. It's designed to de-sovereignize Taiwan's government.
Meaning?
By calling them mere authorities, they avoid calling them a government or the state. It reduces Taiwan's status in the listener's mind from a legitimate, self-governing entity, the Republic of China, ROC, to something like a provincial or regional administrative body that lacks full sovereignty.
It linguistically erases the ROC's claim to statehood?
Exactly. It denies their legitimacy on the international stage, framing them as just a local power structure within one China.
Interesting. Does Taiwan do something similar in reverse?
Sometimes, yeah. You'll hear Taiwanese officials or media refer to the government in Beijing as the CCP authorities or the communist authorities.
Yeah, okay, what's the goal there?
It's also a form of delegitimization, but different. By emphasizing CCP, or communist, they highlight that the entity ruling mainland China is a political party, not necessarily a government that represents the free will of all Chinese people. It stresses the party-state nature of the regime.
So it implies the CCP holds power, but maybe doesn't have the same kind of popular mandate or legitimacy as a democratically elected government?
That's the implication. It challenges the PRC's claim to be the sole legitimate government of China by pointing out its single-party rule.
So this word authorities is basically a verbal tool both sides use to try and knock the other side down a peg, politically speaking.
Pretty much. It's a constant, subtle linguistic battle to define the other side in a way that diminishes their status and legitimacy. Words are definitely weapons in this conflict.
Wow. Okay, we covered a lot today. Started with those different paths to democracy in Korea and Taiwan.
Yeah, then the fundamental differences between the Korean War and the Chinese Civil War.
The really important shift in China's own political system towards Xi's personalized power.
And finally, taking apart those 5 so-called benefits using actual data and looking at the whole bias factory ecosystem that pumps out the propaganda.
The conclusion feels pretty clear, doesn't it? Those 5 benefits aren't a serious offer for a better future. They're marketing slogans wrapped around a demand for surrender.
Totally. The economics are backwards, the peace is conditional on giving up freedom, the infrastructure promises ignore reality. It just doesn't add up.
And maybe the scariest part isn't even the specific lies themselves. You can debunk those pretty easily if you look at IMF data or Freedom House reports.
Right. The bigger danger is that whole system we talked about, the bias factory, that's designed to bypass rational thought altogether. The algorithms, the censorship, the educational priming, the social pressure, it all works together to make emotional, fact-free narratives dominant.
When the neighbor waving the axe tells you he's offering peace and savings, and the information environment actively discourages you from questioning it, that's a dangerous situation.
Especially when the regime making the offer is struggling internally with debt, economic issues, and is consolidating power in a way that looks increasingly totalitarian. Their promise to fix a thriving democracy just rings hollow.
So the final thought maybe is this. The real cost of buying into this propaganda isn't just about politics or economics. It's about letting the language of absurdity, this emotional, illogical rhetoric, replace the language of facts and reason.
And that language of facts, that ability to critically analyze, is the bedrock of any democracy, isn't it? If you accept the premise that unification offered under these terms is peace, you've already lost the argument for self-determination.
Well said. Now, as always here on Sip and Talk, we try to present the data, the history, the context as objectively as we can. We're not taking sides politically. We're laying out the information as reported by international bodies and scholarly consensus.
And we absolutely encourage you, our listeners, to do your own digging. Check the sources we mentioned: World Bank, IMF, Freedom House, academic analyses. Think for yourself.
That critical thinking is always the best defense. So thanks for tuning in to this Sip and Talk discussion. If you found it useful or interesting, definitely hit that subscribe button.
Yeah, and hey, also check out our buddy Mickey's YouTube channel, Mickytolife. He's got some really fun stuff, travel vlogs. Always a good time.
For sure. Give Mickey some love. All right, everyone. We'll catch you on the next one.
See ya then.